Everyone in the town of Alder Springs remembered the blue house at the end of Willow Street. It stood like a lonely memory, its paint faded and its windows cracked from years of storms. Most people passed by without looking, but those who had lived in the town long enough whispered about the family who once called that place home. The Carters. A family that once seemed perfect until everything fell apart in a single winter that changed their lives forever. Thomas Carter was the kind of father people admired. A high school history teacher with a calm voice and eyes that always seemed to understand more than he let on. His wife, Emily, was the heart of their home, a woman who baked pies for the neighbors and volunteered at the library. Together, they had 2 children, Anna, a brilliant 16-year-old who dreamed of going to Yale, and Max, an 11-year-old boy who could fix anything with his tiny, calloused hands. From the outside, they were the family everyone wanted to be, but behind closed doors, a secret was growing. And like a storm gathering over the mountains, it was only a matter of time before it struck. It began with the letters. They arrived in plain envelopes, no return address, written on thin, old paper. The first one came in early November. Emily found it in the mailbox and thought nothing of it until she read it. Her hands trembled as her eyes moved over the words. "I know what Thomas did. You should be careful. He's not who you think he is." At first, she thought it was a prank, maybe a student playing a cruel joke. But when the second and third letters came, each more detailed than the last, her doubt began to grow. Thomas noticed her growing distant, her silence at dinner, the way she avoided his touch. But when he asked what was wrong, she simply said she was tired, always tired. Anna, meanwhile, had secrets of her own. She had fallen in love with someone her parents wouldn't approve of, her English teacher, Mr. Daniels, a man nearly twice her age. Their meeting started innocently. Extra tutoring after class, shared poetry, late-night emails. But it quickly became something deeper, something dangerous. She knew it was wrong, but for the first time, someone truly saw her. She kept her secret buried, convinced she could handle it, unaware that her mother's world was already starting to crack under the weight of suspicion. Max was the only one who still believed everything was okay. To him, the house still smelled like cinnamon and books, and the sound of his father's laugh still meant safety. But even he began to notice the change, the late-night arguments between his parents, the way Anna's eyes were always red, and the way his father sat in the dark alone, staring at nothing for hours. Max didn't understand it, but he felt it. The fear, the tension that wrapped around them like cold wind. Then came the night of the fire. It started with a smell. Emily was the first to notice it, something bitter, like burning plastic. She ran to the kitchen, thinking she had left the oven on, but everything there was cold. Thomas was in the basement, working on an old radio, and Anna was in her room, headphones on, staring at her phone with wet eyes. Max was on the porch, watching snow fall under the yellow glow of the street lamp. And then the smoke appeared, curling from the hallway wall near the circuit breaker. In moments, the house was chaos. Thomas ran upstairs, yelling for everyone to get out. Emily grabbed Max and pulled him outside, but Anna didn't come. The smoke had filled her room. She was frozen, coughing, panicking. Thomas pushed through the smoke to find her, pulling her down the stairs just as the wall behind them exploded in flames. The neighbors came running. Sirens echoed down Willow Street, and by the time the fire was out, half the house was gone. But that wasn't what destroyed the Carters. It was what they found afterward. The firemen said it wasn't an accident. Someone had poured gasoline in the basement. The wires had been cut intentionally. It was arson, and worse, hidden behind one of the burnt walls. They found something no one expected. A box filled with old photographs, newspaper clippings, and cash, thousands of dollars in small bills. But the most shocking item was a letter, sealed and addressed to Emily, in Thomas's handwriting. It read, "If you're reading this, it means it's too late. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I could outrun the past, but it always finds you. I lied to you. I lied to everyone. My real name isn't Thomas Carter, and the man you think you married doesn't exist." Emily couldn't breathe. Her hands shook as she held the letter, her eyes scanning the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. The man she had spent 20 years with, the father of her children, was a stranger. In the days that followed, everything unraveled. Investigators came with questions. Who was he really? Why was he hiding? Where had the money come from? Thomas refused to speak. He was arrested the day after the fire for arson and obstruction. and even as they took him away in handcuffs, he remained silent. Anna couldn't understand how the man who read her bedtime stories could be capable of something so dark. She stopped going to school. Her secret with Mr. Daniels ended abruptly. He stopped answering her messages. Terrified of being exposed during the family scandal, the betrayal stuck, and the shame ran deep. She had trusted two men, and both had lied to her in different ways. She locked herself in her room, letting the charred smell of her clothes linger as a reminder of everything she had lost. Max began having nightmares. He would wake up screaming, convinced the fire was still burning. Emily tried to hold them all together, but she was crumbling too. The insurance company refused to pay arson, voided the policy. She had to move in with her sister, taking the kids to a tiny apartment that smelled like bleach and regret. She took a job cleaning offices at night and folding clothes at a laundromat during the day, doing everything she could to keep her children fed while the world watched their family fall apart on the news. But what truly destroyed Emily wasn't the poverty or the gossip. It was the question that haunted her every night. Who had she married? She dug into old files, searched his name, his job records, even reached out to his relatives only to find out they didn't exist. Every detail of Thomas's life had been fabricated. Even his degree had been faked. And then, after weeks of silence, a letter arrived at the apartment. No stamp, just a plain white envelope with her name written on the front in the same familiar handwriting. Inside was a single page. I didn't set the fire, but I knew it was coming, and I didn't stop it. I've done things I can't undo, but I never stopped loving you. Tell the kids I'm sorry. The trial began in February. Snow still blanketed Alder Springs, turning the roads to grey slush and covering the burned-out remains of the Carter house like a funeral shroud. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious neighbors, and people who had once smiled at Thomas in the grocery store. Emily sat in the front row, her face pale and unreadable. Anna refused to come. Max sat beside his mother, clinging to her hand like a lifeline. When Thomas entered the room in an orange jumpsuit, he looked like a ghost of himself, thinner, older, hollow. The prosecutor laid out the case. Thomas Carter, or rather, Jonathan Marks, his real name, had fled his past 23 years earlier after being involved in a financial fraud scheme in Chicago. He had changed his identity, moved to a small town, and built a new life. No one had known, not even Emily. The money in the basement was part of what he had stolen and hidden before disappearing. For 2 decades, he had lived in fear of being found. And then, someone had found him. The letters, it turned out, were real threats sent by a man named Walter Green, one of Thomas's former partners, recently released from prison. Walter had spent years tracking him down. The fire was Walter's revenge. He had waited until the family was asleep, poured gasoline through the vents, and intended to burn the house with everyone inside. But Thomas had discovered the plan too late. He hadn't called the police, too afraid of being exposed. Instead, he had tried to stop it himself and failed. The jury found Thomas guilty of obstruction and identity fraud, but not arson. Walter Green was later arrested in a warehouse in Ohio, trying to flee the country. The court sentenced Thomas to 10 years in prison. When Emily visited him one last time before the transfer, she stood behind the glass, holding the phone to her ear with shaking fingers. He looked at her, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "I never meant to hurt you." She stared back, silent. Then she slowly placed the phone down and walked away. 3 years passed. The world moved on, as it always does. But the scars on the Carter family ran deep. Emily never remarried. She had learned to live with the silence, to make peace with not having all the answers. She built a modest life, working as a librarian and taking quiet pride in the little victories, paying off a bill, cooking dinner from scratch, seeing Max smile again. She didn't visit Thomas in prison, not even once. Anna graduated high school a year late. She had struggled with depression, withdrawn into herself, and spent months barely speaking. But therapy helped. So did art. She began painting big, abstract pieces full of fire and shadows and light. Her work was featured in a local gallery, and eventually, she moved to New York to study visual arts. She changed her last name. She never spoke of Mr. Daniels again. Max became quiet and observant, older than his years. He stopped building things with his hands and started writing stories instead. Stories about families, about secrets, about people trying to be better than their past. His teachers said he had a gift. Emily often found him staring at the horizon, as if waiting for something to return or disappear. Then one spring afternoon, Emily received another letter, This time it was official, from the Federal Corrections Department. Thomas had died of a heart attack in his cell. No will, no possessions. Only a small notebook left behind. Inside were pages filled with memories, descriptions of Anna's first steps, Max's first words, the first pie Emily ever baked. He had written them all down, every good thing he remembered, as if trying to hold on to the only version of his life that had ever felt real. Emily closed the notebook and held it against her chest for a long time. She didn't move. And then, quietly, she walked to the bookshelf, placed the notebook among the others, and whispered, "You were never real, but we were." Outside, the wind moved through the trees on Willow Street, where the blue house had once stood, and in its place, a new foundation was being built, not just of wood and stone, but of memory, truth, and the courage to begin